This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux in Laws, Season 1, Episode 83. Martin, good morning. Or rather, good afternoon
morning,
or good evening, whatever.
Evening. Wherever you are, yes.
Exactly.
Good something. How are you, Chris?
Can't complain, Martin. What about yourself?
Well, you can always complain. It's quite a national sport in some countries, actually.
The UK probably being at the very top of that list.
I think it might be, yeah.
Closely followed by Germany.
Okay.
But this is not about nationalities, nations, or complaining.
Cultures, yes.
Exactly, cultures, rather something about Linux. So, Martin, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about various ways to get Linux onto your system of choice.
Excellent. So, in that case, just buy a computer with Linux pre-installed and off you go. People
Okay. Yes.
That was short and sweet.
That is an option. Not that many actually come with Linux these days, though, do they?
Well, there are a couple of things.
Yes, but not many.
And yeah, a shameless teaser. We will have one of the companies on the show.
We will? Are we sure about this now?
Yes, we're sure. We're sure. In the not too distant future. So exactly. So this episode should go live before, hopefully, the year's over, maybe early next year. But it's planned to actually have a hardware vendor on the show that will talk about his approach, or their approach rather, to putting Linux on laptops and desktops and what have you.
Okay.
But today is actually, as Martin already pointed out, about distributions. And when I say distributions, I do not mean the kind of things that you simply install by putting it on a stick and just kind of putting it into the computer, booting it up, and then the installer would do it themselves, or itself rather. But something more for what's the word I'm looking for? Ambitious user. But before we touch this, we should probably...
it will become clear when we talk about these things. Right?
But before we do this, Mark, we should probably talk about what exactly defines a Linux distribution.
What defines it? It's a good question. Good question. What defines a distribution?
The mascot, of course, is at the very top of that list.
The person who started it, I guess the way it's laid out, the way it's built, the way it's released. What else?
We're getting there. I'm almost tempted to say
stuff
the mascot.
Like that, I guess.
Yeah, I'm almost tempted to say the mascot and the inventor are totally irrelevant for the actual user. But Martin, when you said update policy and also package management, I think you're getting pretty close, because in my books,
good point.
This would be what defines actually a distribution, i.e. how you get the software on your computer and how often you do this.
Right.
In terms of what is the upgrade policy. As we all know, projects that do not fall victim to bit rot are updated regularly. The kernel comes to mind, LibreOffice, the browser, and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Well, there's also, but in recent years, there's been more, people have changed the release mechanism, haven't they, from, let's say, whatever frequency they had, about 2 years or 1 year, whatever, for major releases. They have like the CentOS streams, and Ubuntu have the same, right? So it's having various ways to keep your system up to date continuously rather than doing major releases. But
exactly, you bring up a very interesting point, because there are two schools out there. So-called rolling releases that continually update. system. Arch probably would be the best example in the Linux world, and then you have other distributions that do it on a version basis. Ubuntu and Fedora and Debian probably are the examples that come to mind immediately.
Yeah. Okay. So what would be the let's say, okay, clearly there's a benefit to having rolling releases because you get the latest versions of stuff automatically, which is nice for patching CVs and stuff like that. Why would you choose for the other method, as in doing, running a distribution for a number of years? And
I mean, it's quite straightforward. As we all know, software never has bugs. Especially new software doesn't have any bugs at all.
Okay, great. You should introduce me to this universe.
No,
I'd be glad to join it.
No, I mean, jokes aside, the proof of the pudding is actually the new when a software has new features. Chances are that these features, never mind the amount of QA, as in quality assurance, that you pour into a software or into a release, let's put it this way, always has bugs. So for me, it's a trade-off between staying up to date with software and the maturity of said software. So I see both sides in terms of the advantage of a rolling release, actually, that you always have the newest shit. But a point release, especially if Tester 1 and all the rest of it, has a level of maturity that you probably don't have in these rolling releases. Debian probably being the best example. Because Debian software tends to be somewhat older, but quite stable. That's the reason why it's my preferred choice for any production server that doesn't have to run the latest shit.
Makes sense. Okay.
I mean, what about you? You mostly use proprietary Linux versions on your various devices, don't you?
I do. Yeah. OS X being one of them, which is
funny enough a BSD variant, yes.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, proprietary. I mean, they're all open source based projects, whatever you want to call them. But yes, I do like the stability of major releases, to be honest, and the fact that it's not so much the Linux itself, right? It's the supporting software that is not the software that you actually want to run on it that is always behind major releases. I can't remember, was it BBB being one of them that's stuck with 1604 Ubuntu for a long time, for example.
Yes, true, very true. Yes, BBB of course refers to Big Blue Button, a system that we use internally for podcast production. Difficult word, indeed.
Yeah.
But I mean, even with the point releases, you're not. I mean, it of course it also depends on the approach or philosophy behind the distribution. Because, for example, I recently upgraded a machine from Fedora 37 to 38, and my preferred display manager of choice, namely SDDM, broke.
Okay.
It used to work for 37. It was okay. But now it complains about some Qt dependency that it simply cannot resolve. So I had to switch back to GDM as a display manager. Now, granted, Fedora is probably a little bit more of a playground than Debian or Ubuntu is. But even with these point releases, you're not immune to software bugs.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
The second deciding feature, I reckon, is the packet manager, at least in my books, of a distribution.
Okay.
And it's funny because
sorry, go ahead.
So
I was going to why? I mean, we'll come to this in a minute, but most Linux distributions have a package manager, right? So,
apart from one, yes.
Yes.
But that's not a distribution in its own right. But we come to that in a minute, exactly.
So you were saying, okay, it depends on the package manager. What specifically do you mean about dependencies on package managers that everybody has? Well, all distributions have one. What would be the differences between various distributions and their package managers then?
That's a very interesting question, Martin, because, I mean, if you take the spins aside, and by spin, I mean a distribution that relies on an upstream one, best example probably being Ubuntu and Debian, because Ubuntu simply takes the upstream stuff that Debian pushes out and then does its own thing with these sources. They both use a package management called APT. But apart from that, each and every Linux distribution, and probably people will name me for that, has its own package management and this approach. And now we're getting into the weeds of the thing. Because there are a couple of philosophies behind software distribution, and many distributions choose the pre-compiled binary approach, i.e. somebody takes a version of a software, puts it into a build system, hopefully does some level of quality assurance on this release, and then packages that release and puts it into a repository where other people can download it. And the other approach is actually that you simply put out the recipes, which people then can pull down and build their releases locally. And the other extreme is actually you just put out guidance on how to build a Linux system, and then people can do it all by themselves. And these are actually the three approaches that we're going to discuss in the rest of the episode. If I'm not completely mistaken, if marketing is anything to go by, that came up with this idea.
No, that sounds good. So where do you want to start, I guess?
Well, let's discuss the three most probable candidates that come to mind: Arch, Gentoo, and Linux from scratch.
Okay. In any particular order?
Well, actually, let's take a look at what defines them.
Okay. All right.
Linux from scratch essentially means you have a couple of books, and these books tell you about how to set up a build system, how to build a base layer of software, how to deploy this software on a machine, and then basically take it to the next level. So step by step, you come to a working system, but at the end of the day, because it's just a collection of mechanisms in terms of how to set up a build system, how to set up a machine, how to deploy software on a machine, essentially you're rolling your own distribution, which has the advantage that you get a system that exactly fits your needs, is more likely than not very, very compact, because you only have the stuff that you need, and as a side effect, you learn Linux from scratch. Hence the name of this project.
Right.
Because
okay.
if you have to do it all by yourself, the knowledge comes along essentially with it.
Okay, that makes sense. That sounds like a it's clearly a good way to learn it inside and out for sure. But yes, it's mainly a set of books or instructions of how to do this rather than any physical thing to download. Size being the main. No, size is not the only advantage of doing that, right? You also have if you optimize, we'll come to Gentoo in a minute, but if you build everything locally towards your machine architecture, you can compile things whichever way you need to run with that.
Exactly. So, for example, if you still have this Commodore Amiga sitting in the corner, about 40, 50 years old, all you have to do is
Commodore Amiga.
Yes, it was an ancient machine from the 80s.
It was made by someone else, wasn't it? Amiga? No?
No, I think Commodore bought it. At some stage, or stick to Atari. These computers,
Oh,
in
Amiga.
theory, were able to run Linux because they had all the necessary bits and pieces in place, like an MMU, 1630-bit CPU, and all the rest of it. So all you have to do is essentially you have to create a toolchain that allows you to compile Linux and corresponding software packages for that architecture. Once you have this cross-compilation toolchain in place, you're off to the races. Because you take a kernel, build that kernel for this specific architecture. If the kernel still supports this, kernel.org is your best bet here for that sort of thing. No, I mean, jokes aside, there are quite a few people that still run 32-bit systems, especially in the ARM world. The ARMS v5, the ARMS v6 come to mind.
Okay.
And for example, many of the early single-board computer systems, like the early Raspberry Pis, the Shiva plugs of the world, and all the rest of it, had 32-bit CPUs on them. And given the fact that even Arch has dropped 32-bit ARM support, you are confined to, I think, Debian. Ubuntu has dropped also 30-bit support, so you're still confined to Debian and a few other distributions that still support 32-bit ARMs, unless you do it yourself. And this is the advantage, because once you have this cross-compilation toolchain up and running, you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. However, probably not for everyone.
No. Word of advice, exactly. If you have just been left by your partner, or have gotten a divorce, or are looking for a time-intensive new hobby, then Linux from scratch is exactly what you want to use.
Fair enough.
Because, I mean, granted, if you take a look, and of course links will be in the show notes, if you take a look at these books take you by the hand, but given the fact that you are building a system from scratch, you learn a lot, but it's not something that you do over a weekend or within an hour, like kind of downloading an ISO image, putting on a stick, slotting that stick into a laptop or into another computer, booting it up. You have a live system then, and then that live system basically takes you through the install. This is the preferred approach with Fedora, Debian, Ubuntu, whatever, and that's exactly not the case with Linux from scratch.
True. Okay. So, makes sense. What would be another option? You mentioned Gentoo earlier.
Yes, Gentoo has a slightly different approach.
Some kind of penguin, no?
Yes, actually, I think Gentoo is actually the fastest penguin on species on the planet, hence the name.
Fastest in which way?
Speed?
Yeah, speed of what?
Motion, if memory serves correct. As in how these critters move through water and...
Waddling? Or...
Say again?
Waddling or whatever penguins do, I don't know.
Waddling,
sliding on ice. Sorry?
Yes, swimming, maybe.
Swimming, flying penguin, maybe. Who knows?
It depends on the amount of cash that they have on them for penguins, right?
Indeed. Yeah.
But maybe credit cards will do the trick as well. You never know. No, I mean...
Okay, carry on, yes.
The idea behind Gentoo was actually similar to Linux from scratch, to give you a system that is tailored to your needs. But rather than you building it yourself, Gentoo takes you a little bit more by the hand and gives you, most of the times, gives you a recipe to how to build the software. So if you want to set up a Gentoo system, essentially you pull down a base image, similar to Fedora, similar to Ubuntu, similar to Debian, and install this on your machine. And then it uses a package manager called Portage that is not too distant from MacPorts, Homebrew, and some other package managers that especially are deployed in the BSD world, because what this package manager does, it basically takes a recipe, pulls down the sources from software repositories like GitHub or FTP sites, and then builds the package locally. But this recipe then, or this package manager rather, knows how to resolve any dependencies recursively, meaning All you have to do is basically you give it a recipe. That recipe contains build instructions, but also contains dependencies. And then Portage, similar to other package managers, resolves these dependencies recursively, pulls down the sources for these as well, resolves their dependencies and all the rest of it, and so simply builds the software locally step by step by step. This is the advantage. I'm tempted to say, or rather, difference before people crucify me. This is the difference between Linux from scratch and Gentoo, because with Gentoo you get these I think they're called e-builds.
Okay.
Because the corresponding Portage command is actually called emerge. So what emerge essentially does is basically it pulls down a new version of the recipe, builds the software locally, and deploys it on your machine. Now there are of course exceptions to this rule, because for anybody who has tried to compile Firefox or LibreOffice knows that this build, even on a fast machine, takes hours, if not days. So some of the stuff you can pull down pre-compiled as a pre-build.
Okay.
But this is the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah. Okay. And this repository, who maintains the source code?
I think it's called Gentoo.org, but as I said, links will be in the show notes. Okay. No, I mean the project itself maintains these recipes, these e-builds.
Well, the recipe is fine, but what about the actual, let's say, the source code? That's just sort of from various locations, as you mentioned.
Well, whatever the recipe contains, whether it's GitHub or something like this. I mean,
right? Okay.
I mean, if you take a look at GitHub, if you have these tags, and these tags normally reflect releases, and more often than not, these tags do have download assets, like compressed tar files and zips and all the rest of it. But for the kind of daring people, needless to say, depending on the recipe, it just may pull down a master version. Or in more politically correct terms, I think GitHub has renamed this. It's now called main.zip. If I'm not completely mistaken.
Right. So sounds like less work than Linux from scratch for sure. Okay, what's the difference with just a normal pre-built binary distribution? Fine, you could have compiling it locally, but why would you want to do this apart from wasting a lot of machine time?
No, I mean that's a very valid question, Martin. Again, the answer is compactness, modularity, and because essentially what you do, based on your own hardware, you can deploy. And if you take a look at the Gentoo documentation, that's exactly what you're doing when you're setting up the build environment for these recipes. You specify the exact version of the CPU, the exact version of the architecture, the exact optimization for all the packages that you build locally. And that gives you, of course, exactly the build, exactly the level of optimization that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the advantage over somebody else compiling the stuff for you. Needless to say, you do not get any bloat with Gentoo, because you only get the software that you need. Unlike, for example, Mint or Ubuntu, to name two distributions, where you install the stuff and where you get quite a few megabytes of software that you probably don't ever use, but because Canonical or the other projects have decided to include that into the distribution, you simply have to install and download it.
Yeah, I mean, even with those distributions, you do get a certain amount of customization when you set it up, right? So you can include various or not. You just install Ubuntu server without any desktop environments, things like that. So there are options there, but yes, there's clearly another step with something like a Gentoo to be gained.
Yeah. Plus, Gentoo doesn't bother you out of the box with something called snaps, for example, which are...
I think we mentioned these before.
Which are quite the rage.
Are they?
With Ubuntu these days, yes.
Yes, I think they were mentioned in an episode before. I can't remember which one we were talking about.
I mean, it's a heated discussion because more and more projects are actually moving towards these containerized packaging formats. I'm just taking a look at Fedora, and GNOME also is very in favor of something called Flatpaks these days.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, fine. So we have some improvement with Gentoo. Oh, improvement. So, some more pre-built stuff with Gentoo. Okay. What about Arch then? How is that different?
Arch is actually a very interesting beast because, in theory, yes, you would get pre-compiled binaries that you simply download, similar to Ubuntu, Fedora, and all the rest of them,
Okay.
that you simply download from an update site or upgrade site. But Arch is interesting in that regard because there's something called, apart from the project-maintained repositories like Core Extra and all the rest of them, which essentially contain software that a base installation is made up of. Arch has something called the AUR, the Arch User Repository.
Mm-hmm.
And full disclosure, I used to be an Arch package maintainer for a couple of Arch packages, and what this AUR contains is actually similar to Gentoo. Package builds, as they are called, as in PKG build. These are again recipes of how to compile stuff locally. So Arch is somewhat in between, say, Gentoo and kind of fully pre-compiled binary-based systems like Ubuntu, Fedora, and
okay, so a bit of a mixture of yeah. Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's a very interesting approach because there's a little bit of overlap between Gentoo and Arch because Arch supports package builds. And if you take a look at the core repositories like Core Extra and some other stuff, all they do is actually they also have package builds themselves. So each and every Arch package has a package build that is used to build the software. This package build contains basically where the software comes from, its dependencies, patches, any patches that have to be applied before the stuff's built, and all the rest of it. So the main difference between Gentoo and Arch is that Gentoo, as a standard, does it locally on your machine, whereas Arch basically pulls down precompiled binaries. But the situation flips with some packages. As I said, Gentoo supports precompiled binaries for the big projects like LibreOffice, like Firefox, and all the rest of it. And Arch has package builds for any AUR project that is out there, which has the interesting side effect that some of the Arch user repositories package builds really, and this has been a pet gripe of mine for at least the last 6 years, simply basically pull down Intel binaries on architectures that do not support Intel binaries.
Okay.
Because the core project itself, and I had long discussions with some of the core devs of Arch, only is of the opinion there's only Intel out there. And to be more precise, there's only 64-bit Intel out there. So you had all these spins like Alarm that simply took the Arch upstream package builds and build it for local, non-Intel architectures.
Yeah. Okay.
Alarm, of course, being the best example for ARM architectures like V5, V6, V7. But with that, of course, comes a severe disadvantage because if this spin then decides to drop, for example, 32-bit support, you're left to your own devices. And that's exactly what Alarm did at the end of last year.
And why did they do this?
Because they considered 32-bit ARM architectures to be obsolete. Funny that, because I still know quite a few people that have ancient hardware sitting in their basement, sitting in their closets, the likes of Shiva plugs and some other 32-bit ARM architectures that were running Alarm and which wouldn't get any updates then, because if you drop 32-bit support, you drop 32-bit builds, so you won't get any security updates and all the rest of it. So that's a pretty dire situation. Plus the fact that some of the AUR package builds actually just take a look at a download site that has a precompiled Intel binary and try to pull this down to your local ARM machine, ignoring the fact that actually you can specify the corresponding architecture as part of the package build.
Right.
But they do regardless. So the word of advice here is if you're using Arch, especially if you're using it on non-Intel hardware, like the V7s, V8s of the ARM world, before you install a package, take a serious look, as in coming from the AUR, take a serious look at the package build itself. What it does, where it gets stuff from, what it pulls down, and what it installs, and so forth. Because chances are you get a binary on your machine that will work.
That is not very helpful. Yeah.
No, this is the disadvantage of the AUR, of the Arch user repository, because in contrast to the core repositories, these package builds are not necessarily checked, as in quality assured.
So as your 32-bit ARM user, what options have you got, actually?
Debian comes to mind.
Okay.
Linux from scratch, of course. Gentoo.
Well, yeah. Yeah, Linux from scratch sounds like a nice university project or something. Or as you say, if you just had a recent, let's say, job redundancy or whatever, you have plenty of spare time on your hands. But
I mean, the only distribution that comes to mind immediately that still supports 32-bit ARM is actually Debian. Of course, feedback is welcome, so if you know more distributions, feel free to drop an email to feedback@linuxinhouse.eu.
Okay.
So, conclusions, Mr. Visser.
Conclusions? Well, I mean, how have you done the Linux from scratch?
Years ago.
Having been recently not longer stopped working.
Oh, might not still work. You can believe that. No, ages ago, I took a look at, but we're talking at least 7 or 8 years just to take a crack of it. But I didn't conclude even the base image, as in building the base image, because I didn't have the time.
So how much time are we looking at, do you think?
I mean, I tried to do it over a weekend to get going and then in the evenings, but I reckon, depending on your level of expertise, I mean, granted, both Gentoo and Linux from scratch really take you by the hand. And these projects, and to a lesser extent also Arch, people will crucify me, but jokes aside, people, the Arch Wiki is probably one of the best documented.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, I do like the Arch Wiki.
Exactly.
Yep.
Same goes for the instructions that are out there for Gentoo and also from Linux from scratch. Both of them are pretty up to date. Both of them have the latest updates, I think, going back to March of 2023, so really current. Linux from scratch and Gentoo. Both projects really take you by the hand, guide you through the steps of how to set this up. What they just require is a base understanding of a modern PC architecture, i.e. how disks work and so forth. But apart from that, they guide you through the partitioning, setting up swap space and all the rest of it. But they do that in a very detailed technical level. And as a prereq, as I said, not much is required. With Linux from scratch, of course, you should know how to set up a Linux machine because you need a second Linux machine in order to build your toolchain, in order to set up your compilation environment for Linux from scratch. So that project does require a basic understanding of how Linux works, but Gentoo on the other side is a little bit less demanding because all you have to do is basically, and of course Gentoo does come with kind of installer scripts that will basically pull down and build a base image for you. So all you have to do is basically you have to prep the hardware environment, set up the partitions and all the rest of it, and then you simply pull down the script and then the script will do the rest for you. So it'll set up an initial compilation environment. It will set up a change root. It will install a base layer or a stage, as they call it in Gentoo. It will install a stage 3, to be more precise, on this hardware. And once this stage 3 installation has been done, you can actually reboot machine and are sitting in front of a base user land.
Yeah.
That then allows you to install additional packages like graphical user environments and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So if you wanna deviate from the likes of Ubuntu, Mint, and whatever,
Debian.
Yes, Debian to some extent. Take a look at Arch, Gentoo, and of course Linux from scratch, depending on your level of amount, on your amount of time that you have at your disposal, of your ambitions, and of your requirements, essentially. I mean, I'm tempted to say if you have very little time and if you want to stick to Intel, the likes of Debian and Ubuntu probably, or even Fedora or CentOS Stream, Rocky, you name it. Yes.
Yep.
Not to forget them, are probably your weapon of choice, inverted commas. But I mean, if you are deviating from that, and if you really want to get into the weeds, take a look at these three different alternatives.
Okay.
That would be my side or my conclusion. Martin, anything to add before we venture nearer the dark side?
No, I'm looking forward to the dark side, yeah, for sure.
Oh, yes. So now, people, because Martin has been pushing this for ages, we are more than happy to give you another episode of the dark side. Again, feel free to send us feedback. And with that, enjoy the following sketch. This is the dark side, tech support. How may I help you?
My name is Amos, ruler of Egypt. My people have lost something.
Not again. This is the second time today that people ring about lost items. We are not the lost property office, you know.
This is important. My people have suffered a great loss.
Okay, I get it. Support contract number, please.
How should I know? I normally leave such administrative details to one of the lower gods or even priests.
Sorry, without a valid support contract, I cannot help you.
Okay, let me have a look. It's 66666 666 666 and 666.
That's 5 times 666, correct. Are you one of these devil worshippers, perchance?
Not that I know of.
Turns out that somebody named Osiris just renewed your support contract before the... Wait, 10 plagues hit? Have you lost one of these plagues?
No, far worse. My people just lost their firstborns, kids and cattle.
The 10th plague, I see. Sorry, mate, but can't help there.
What? Is that what Egypt is paying support for?
Relax. I may have a solution. Let me check if God is available. Buddy, do you have a minute? Some Egyptian chap wants to have a word about some genocide or something. Seems to be somewhat important. Okay, I'll patch him through. Amos, are you still there? Putting you through to her right now. This call may be monitored for quality and training purposes, though. If you are in disagreement, please disconnect now.
This is Yahweh, the Heavenly. How can I be of assistance?
My people have lost all their firstborns, including cattle.
Your name and support contract number?
Amos, ruler of Egypt, support contract number 5 times 666.
I see. Let me look up your file. Yep, I have you here. Consider yourself lucky. If it wasn't for the assembly of higher deities, I wouldn't have stopped at cattle and firstborns, but would have ended the whole lot of you, including mites, flunkies, pharaohs, in that order.
What?
You see, there's this congregation of higher deities called the Assembly of Gods, who think they know it all and are thus entitled to run the show. Trouble is that every minor genocide, like ending Egypt for good, has to be put to a vote in front of the whole lot of them. Further trouble is that most of them consider themselves in the greater good, subscribing to the illusion that all gods and their people are created evil. Sorry, pun intended. I couldn't resist. equal, and at the end of the day come close to something called communism about 2,000 years from now on. That pretty much saved your kind.
You speak in riddles.
Divine interventions seem to be complicated with humans. No change here. According to the ruling opinion, a tiny Egyptian genocide would have created an imbalance when it comes down to religions, as there would not have been people subscribing to ISIS and the Motley Crew. Not that I would care, by the way. So it wasn't on with the purist among the assembly who called the shots. Too bad. So that motion was overruled, and I had to go for cattles, and firstborns only, I'm afraid. But I digress.
But why, in the name of Osiris and Isis, why did you kill them in the first place? Without a people or even cattle, there's nothing much to rule, so I have to go look for a new job or hitting the dole queue right away.
Oh, yes, good question. Let me look this up on your file. Okay, got it now. It says here that you enslaved a people called Israelites as a thank you for their services to your country. Even in our non-politically correct times, most people would consider this somewhat of an offence. As history is all about repeating, I had to set an example in order to avoid similar future incidents.
But who will help me building pyramids in my name to all future generations and attract visitors, which in turn will guarantee prosperity and social stability for generations to come?
Look, buddy, if you tie yourself to tourism too much, you will be exposed at any economic influxation, locally or foreign. First thing that people will save on is travel once a pandemic hits or economy goes south. You're not doing yourself a favour. Plus the fact that other people are way better at this. In the not too far distant future, a chap up the road beyond the desert will walk across the water, attracting way more people than your petty tombstones. Proper circus for a change.
I couldn't care less, as you are wrong, divine or not. What is going to happen next?
Either you let the Israelites go, or more plagues will punish you and your people.
Do enlighten me.
Not too far in the future, an emperor will invade Egypt, coming across the sea from the north, and will enslave your people.
Couldn't care less, as I'll be a fading drawing on a pyramid wall by then of people will look at me in foreign countries if the priests finally get mummification right.
I will send more conquerors from the north, invading your country and selling cheap takeaway food on every street corner, leading to your people fading into oblivion due to malnutrition.
My people are strong enough and will survive if we have enough cats to sustain on.
I will convince ISIS into putting a female ruler into place who will collude with the emperor from the north.
I give up. The first punishment is enough. No mingling with foreigners required. The Israelites go free.
Finally. But you took your sweet time. Why is it always that difficult with petty-minded kings, Egyptian or not? I'd prefer your kind to be convinced by arguments rather than having to resort to threats almost every time. Man, this is difficult. And certainly wasn't part of the job description when I signed up for this gig. All those million years ago. Anyway, I think we're done here. And please, no more complaints from any people about you lot, Israelites or not. Otherwise, the next 10 plagues will make version 1.0 look like a walk in the park. Think along the lines of Trump getting re-elected or something.
Who is Trump and what does he have to do with it?
Better keep my gabs shut about future events. The space-time continuum is screwed up enough as it is. Oh, doesn't matter. Oh, you wouldn't understand this anyway if you don't get the tie-in of tourism with macroeconomic aspects. I'll hand you back to the first level and nice talking to you.
Is there anything else I can do for you today?
I think I learned my lesson.
Thank you for choosing the dark side in that case, and have a nice day. And don't hesitate to ring the dark side again in any case of further plagues or other tiny inconveniences. Which goes to show that even gods cannot really be trusted with getting the job right, even if a ruler is a chauvinistic pig. So, choose your religion wisely. So, Martin, what do you make of it?
What did I make of it? Yes, well,
God and the Pharaoh and the operator.
I didn't know God was Scottish, but there we go. You learn something new every day.
Martin,
I think they have some different problems up there at the moment, but
I reckon
maybe
God
need some divine intervention as well, the SNP.
SNP, if you're not happy with that comment, please send feedback.
Yes.
No, jokes aside, I think deities and that of course would include God itself, herself, or himself, come in many shapes and forms. So
yes, of course. Scottish being one of them.
Exactly. And as we all know, I think most of the deities are actually female, or not? Maybe not.
You do? Okay.
But genders are.
I thought they were gender independent.
You never know. But I mean,
Neutral,
genders are invented concept anyway, Maybe evolution just took a wrong turn. I don't know.
I think they probably don't have a gender because they don't reproduce things for genders, do they? So that's why there's so few of them. Otherwise, there'd be loads of gods everywhere.
Exactly. But I mean, I think Hindus don't stop at 1,000 of them or something. So they must all come from, Hindus don't stop at 1,000 of them. So they all must come from somewhere.
Right. Yes. Well, they come from the Big Bang, don't they? Possibly. Who knows?
I think there are books
maybe we should probably
written on the subject that go into
yes.
a desired level of detail outlining how it's done. But that may be actually a subject for another episode.
Indeed.
How to spawn or fork gods. Interesting. Okay, yes.
Good book title.
Yes. And with that, people, we would like to thank you for listening.
Indeed.
See you soon.
Bye.
This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Salute Margaret, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.